Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rounders, a history of baseball in America. I am excited to have with me today another Jeff. You may know him better on social media under the username Mask and Mitten. Jeff is here today to discuss with us a little bit about the history of catcher's equipment. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Now, for those who may not be familiar with you and your social media account and what you post online, could you just give a quick overview of what you collect and what you share in general for baseball fans?
So I love vintage catcher's gear, and so I've been collecting that for the last 7 or 8 years. I was a catcher growing up, and so I started this collection because I didn't see anybody else doing the same, or at least they weren't advertising it. And so I try to work in the dead ball era period, all the way up to about 1940, primarily collecting masks and mitts or mittens, if it's early enough, and any other type of paraphernalia that really deals with that position. And so I post a lot of those things on my Instagram account, along with a lot of catchers from the dead ball era, pictures of them. I try to find pictures that nobody else has seen, or ones that really encapsulate the actual position and how it was played during that time period.
And I can't wait to jump into talking a little bit about what you have in your collection. And before we get into that, I wanted to just get a start from the beginning and really get to know you as a baseball fan. Really, could you discuss with us a little bit about what are the roots of your love for baseball? When did you start taking an interest in the sport? Where did that passion for the game begin?
It started early. So I played Little League, and up through high school. And at about high school, I started in the position of a catcher. I always wanted to be a catcher. I was always drawn to it's the field general is what I equate it to. And so in high school, I actually did pretty well. I was pretty fortunate. I got drafted my senior year out of high school by the Texas Rangers. This is back in 1997. Mm-hmm. And made the decision to go to college instead. I was drafted so low. And so I played college ball for about 3 years. And into my junior year, I ended up getting injured and stopped playing. One of my regrets to this day. And I probably should have finished out. But ever since then, I really love the position, and I've always followed a lot of the catchers. And one of my favorite teams at the time was the Texas Rangers. And Pudge Rodriguez. How could you not love Pudge? One of the best that played. And so that's what really brought me into this field of wanting to collect like I said, the items. I don't know what it is about. It's almost like the suit of armor. You're out on the field, and there was something about it that really like draws me to it, if that makes sense.
I've always looked at it as you really are the quarterback, the field general, I guess you could say, for your team. When you're behind the plate, not only are you calling the balls and strikes, setting up the strategy for the pitcher, but you're really directing a lot of things at once. It's a very it's a cerebral position. You have to know everything that's going on at all times.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't know a lot of the things that do go on, or a lot of things that catchers do are responsible for on the field. There's a lot more than what you see on TV. And I always tell people, your best catcher is a catcher you don't notice. That means he's not making any errors. He's not doing anything wrong. That's a good catcher.
So you bring up a great point, Jeff. There's so many catchers that I respect, just growing up a fan myself. One of my favorite catchers of all time was Jason Varitek for the Boston Red Sox. I think he oversaw 8 no-hitters throughout his career, and I think it was through 5 different pitchers. Don't quote me on that. That's off the top of my head. But he was so good at making the pitchers on in the rotation for the Red Sox, just so much better. And there was a change there too. When he retired, when he moved on, you could see the drop. And I don't think a lot of people gave him credit for that during his time, just how much better he made, I guess you could say, the people around him that depended on him. So that's who I think of when I think of a catcher that I really respect and follow. But there's a long list of them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. I wanted to ask you, in your description for your social media profile on Instagram, you list that you're a Tools of Ignorance devotee. Now, for baseball fans and historians, we've heard the term tools of ignorance. And, being a vintage catcher's gear collector as you are, I was wondering if you could start us off, since this is a history podcast, talking about that term. Do you have any background history into what tools of ignorance refers to, what the origin of that term was, and what exactly it refers to?
So from my research, I mean, I'd always heard it growing up. But from what I understand, it was Harold Rule who actually coined the term back in around 1915, or he played between 1915 and 1934. But he made coined the term because the position needed so much equipment. So almost like you'd have to be an idiot to play it, because so many people were getting injured at the time. So you'd have to be almost ignorant to play the catcher's position. So I just love the way it sounds. It almost sounds as if, to me, it's almost like a badge of honor term, I guess. Because when I played, I always had people say, "Oh, tools of ignorance," as if it was a derogatory comment towards me, which I never thought it was. Like I said, it's the tough position of being a catcher. And you're smarter than like we said earlier, the field general, you're smarter than a lot of people know, So yeah, the tools of ignorance, and I definitely a devotee of it. So.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it takes a lot of guts. It takes someone who's really willing to, squat down, groin out, and take a 90-mile-per-hour fastball right, to the stomach every time. And not only that, to deal with base runners coming straight at you and crashing into you, in order to just do whatever's needed, really, whether it's a pop-up and jumping into the stands behind you. There's a lot of hazard that goes with that position, I think is a fair statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, let's go ahead and talk about, so the tools of ignorance, you're right. There's a lot of equipment involved with being a catcher, and obviously that's come a long way since, the origins of baseball. I was hoping you could give us a little bit of a history lesson on the evolution of catcher's gear. Starting back around 1864, when we start to see the first organized clubs pop up, based on your collection, where did you see catcher's gear really start to evolve? What did some of the first pieces look like?
Well, so going all the way, I mean, obviously there was no pieces worn. Back in the 1860s, there was actually mouthpieces that were worn. And I actually posted one on my Instagram account today that I found, coincidentally enough, and almost like a boxer's mouthpiece. But mind you, the catchers weren't right on top of the plate like they are today. They were, 8 to 10 feet behind the plate, often fielding the pitch off the bounce. Not wearing any type of glove equipment. And as pitchers evolved, the catching position evolved as well, which required more equipment. So the closer the catcher got to the plate, obviously, the more equipment they would need, foul tips. Also, pitchers started throwing overhand somewhere around 1870. And with that came the need for catchers to be able to catch the ball more efficiently. And so you didn't really have any type of equipment, like I said, going up until about 1870s, I think you said 1864 with organized ball, so about 1870. And this started with a gentleman by the name of Fred Thayer. He was played at Harvard, not with the Harvard Nines. And from what I understand, there was a catcher on the team that did not want to play because he was scared of getting hurt. And he didn't want to play in the position. And so Fred Thayer actually went to a Boston wire maker and asked him to make him a mask. And the mask resembled more of a fencing mask, if you're familiar with the fencing. And he made him this mask and gave it to this player, and this player agreed to play. Mm-hmm. And so with that, the mask just evolved from there. It picked up quickly. Spalding picked it up. They started advertising it back in the early or late 1800s. And like I said, the mask evolved because at one point it was just the fencing style with the round oval with the pad and the bar that ran vertically all the way down.
do you know how well that was accepted by the general, players that were in the game? Was it something that was seen as, well, we're not going to wear a mask because it's, kind of a knock on our manliness, or was it seen as, oh God, this is a great idea. I have more protection now.
Yeah. So from what I've understand, the mask wasn't as looked against as some of the other equipment, and I'll tell you about it a little bit later. The mask, because there were so many concussions with these players going on, broken noses, teeth getting knocked out. I had never heard of anybody calling them a sissy like they did when they wore the leg guards or the chest protector.
Sure.
Because with those items, you'll see that they actually wore those under their uniform in order to conceal it better, where the mask was obvious.
Okay.
But I hadn't seen anything that would remark that. And I would imagine that people did make comments towards it, because I had read somewhere that the mouthpiece actually they thought the mouthpiece was going to be a great idea because it would shut the catcher up. He wouldn't be sitting there mouthing off to the batters. So
yeah, I can see why that would be a benefit for some of the people that stood behind the plate. Sure. Okay, so we have the catcher's mask, and that developed, as you mentioned, and was accepted, widely, and obviously was needed with the hazards of things flying at your face in such a way. Was there another piece of catcher's gear that caught on in terms of popularity after the mask? What was the next progression of the catcher's equipment evolution?
So it would be the chest protector, or actually we'd go back. If we're going chronologically, it would be the glove, because the glove, starting off with barehanded, and then as it progressed, they had two-hand gloves, like you and I know, like a regular glove on both hands. Excuse me. And when I talk about concealing any type of equipment, the gloves were actually made flesh-colored as well, so the fans wouldn't see these players using these gloves because they didn't want to be ridiculed. But the glove, like I said, as the catcher got closer to the plate, the glove evolved as well. We started with both hands, fingerless, and then, I'm trying to remember the date. They actually started getting into the pillow form, and there was a player, and I'm not going to be able to quote who the player was, but he was having so many issues with balls. These guys had jammed fingers, broken hands, maimed hands. And so he actually sewed together two of those standard gloves and fashioned a sort of type of a pillow looking type of mitt, something that resembles a little bit more of what we see today.
Smart idea.
Yeah. And of course if it was cold weather, God bless him, it hurt. If it was warm, your hand would actually start going numb after a while, from what I've read, and it was easier to bear. But as the mitts progressed, they started getting larger, and they'd actually call them pillow mitts. And I actually have one in my collection, and I love it. It's one of my favorite pieces. They're so big. I think the regulation is 38 inches, and this is well beyond it. And they began to progressively get smaller. But with that said, with it being a pillow mitt, they didn't have a pocket in them. And so when the pitchers would throw, you would have to use your alternate hand to trap the ball. And so with that came broken fingers, broken hands from foul tips on that alternate hand. And so they'd actually developed a mitt with a better pocket, if that makes sense, a little bit deeper of a pocket. And they were still trapping the ball for a long period of time before they went to what we know now as the clam form, where the glove actually closes.
Interesting.
And the mitts, anything under the sun. I mean, they'd always come up with a different type of form of mitt. Some of them had the metal buckle on the top. Some of them actually had it a form. It was a big deal for them to be able to get the glove off their hand quicker. And so they actually patented a glove where you could throw the glove off your hand a whole lot easier if you needed to get it off. I don't know why, but that was a thing. I guess before it was more strapped onto your hand. I don't know. And I actually do collect gloves as well. I don't know if I mentioned that before. And I have several. And some of these mitts are actually made of different type of materials. And it's interesting, buckskin, and it made me think, going back to the masks, to jump back really quick, I had read somewhere that the actual leather, or the material, no, I shouldn't say leather, the material that was used on the padding of the masks was imported dog skin. That just kind of jumbled my mind there when I was thinking about it, when you're starting to think about the different type of leathers used for gloves.
Yeah, hey, it's good to keep Fido nearby. I guess that my first question when you mentioned that, Jeff, that you've probably had a chance to put some of these gloves on that you're collecting, that you're purchasing and adding. Did any of them feel comfortable compared to a modern catcher's mitt, where you'd actually feel like I could get behind a plate and work with this, or were they all just okay? They were products of their time, but I would never use this in a real game situation.
Oh yeah, I couldn't imagine using the majority of them. Like I said, especially with the pillow mitts, they're so rigid; they're almost like pancakes. And especially when you have a pitcher that's throwing high velocity type pitches, in order to trap that ball, it's going to pop right out of your hand. They're so rigid. And so if you get your hand in the wrong spot at the right time, that pitch is going to hit your hand. Which leads me to the next point is one of the reasons they started going to the clam style glove is because of specialty pitches like the curveball or wild pitches. So if you have the rigid catcher's mitt of the time, the pillow style, and you had to reach outside of the catcher's strike zone in order to catch the ball, you couldn't get that alternate hand out there to trap it.
Sure. You just
the ball. You're knocking it down.
Yeah. Gotcha. And do you have a date as to when the clam style glove started to gain popularity?
I think it was probably around the 1920s time era. You actually start seeing a lot of the gloves change, where they actually started getting the actual basket, and almost like a fielder's glove, where catcher's gloves have always been just this oval shape. Okay. And you'll see around the 1920s, towards the end of the dead ball era, for obvious reasons, the ball changed. So the gloves changed.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. It's an adaptation. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the clam style, and like you said, that's really what we've had moving forward. We've got the mask, and we have the glove, and catchers are getting closer to the plate in order to be able to handle the higher velocity pitches coming in. What would you say would be the next big evolution in terms of catcher's equipment?
So the chest protector, and the chest protector probably came on around the same time as the glove. Probably, so the chest protector around 1880s, where the glove was 1884. So the chest protector, like I explained before, I had read, and I don't know how accurate it is, that Red Doolin is his name. Actually, his wife was concerned about him getting injured as he was playing. And so she fashioned something for him, which he wore under his uniform. It was wrapped around his sternum, or his chest. And obviously he didn't want the fans to know he's wearing, or his co-players. And it caught on so well with him, he actually fashioned one with paper mache, from what I've read.
Wow.
The chest protector didn't really become what we know it is now until my man Roger Brashnahan wore it publicly, which he's one of my all-time favorites, a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. The chest protector was actually air inflated, and it's an apron style. So it hung from the neck, and you would actually inflate the chest protector for the game with air. And then when you were done with the game, you could deflate it, and it would roll up and package well, for your bag. And a lot of these pictures, a lot of the ones I try to post online, I will show, the catchers that will be wearing the mask, they'll be wearing the chest protector, minus the leg guards. And those type of apron style chest protectors are huge, actually extending almost down past the groin area, but with little protection around the collarbone or the shoulders, like you see protected now. So they weren't great, but it's a far cry between that and what not wearing one.
And you said Roger Bresnahan, you mentioned him as a catcher, and he really popularized the tools of ignorance from my research, the full scale, I guess, armor of a catcher, as you mentioned. And this goes back to my question with the face mask too. In your research of him and him popularizing, I guess, the full suit, how was that received by the general public and by other players? Was it again seen as something that was taking away from the integrity of the game, or something that a sissy, like you said, would do?
Yeah, it was. and Brashnahan had enough nerve to, publicly wear it. He was tired of getting hit by wild pitches and foul balls, and fans would ridicule him, as well as players. That again, the catcher's position was the rough and tough, manly position. Again, that may go back to the ignorance term there, because it doesn't matter how tough you are if you can't play anymore with a broken hand and broken eye sockets. There was actually one of the players that wore one of the first face masks, had broken eye sockets, that it ended up ending his career. And so, yeah, it was a big deal. And I think I read somewhere, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but I thought Brashnahan might have been a fighter. So he would actually confront fans who were giving him a hard time about it. I may be misspeaking. It was him or another catcher, because it bothered him so bad. But I don't blame him. I absolutely don't blame him for wearing it. I can't imagine them playing for so long without the chest protector.
No, I agree with you. And it certainly was an important development, because, we see where baseball has gone today, and certainly the velocity and the diversity of pitches that we see. To imagine a catcher standing back there and handling those types of pitches, we probably wouldn't have seen that progression if we hadn't seen the catcher's progression happen at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely. And the longevity of these players as well. Catchers didn't last long, and now you're seeing them last longer. The position is taxing enough. Squatting down, 162 games. Some of these guys are playing almost the full line of games, like Pudge Rodriguez. It's a taxing position, and then to add on top of it these type of injuries that would come with the lack of protection. So I think the advancements have only gotten better. But it's just fascinating to me what they had to work with at the time.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a quick break for the 7th inning stretch. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Will, talk to me.
ABC Tuesdays.
They took his daughter. She's coming home alive.
Will Trent, the series critics are calling powerful must-see TV, continues to thrill.
Shouldn't we strategize before we go in there?
If we screw up this case, a cop killer walks free.
With its most dramatic and heart-racing season yet.
GBI!
Help me!
Get down!
Will Trent, all new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
And welcome back to the show, everybody. Let's pick up where we left off in our conversation with Jeff Fields. So, Jeff, and so we have, like you said, Brashnahan in the 1920s and 30s, I believe, if I'm correct, really taking it to the place where we see the chest protector, the shin guards, the mask, and that becoming kind of the standard outfit for catchers. Were there any other progressions in catchers' equipment after that time period that you saw as being landmark?
So again, going back to Brashnahan, we'd go to the leg guards. And I may have misspoke. Brashnahan wasn't the first to wear the chest protector. Obviously, it dates back to the 1886. I just mentioned him because he's the one that you see the most wearing the chest protector. But with that said, he got tired of the getting spiked foul balls, thrown bats, on his legs. And there is reports that other guys had worn leg guards before. And I actually may have misspoke on that too. I think it was Red Dooling who actually wore first leg guards. I may have got him confused, but you have to forgive me. But anyway, they'd actually wrap newspaper around their shins under their uniform. But later on, like I said, Brashnahan got so tired of it, he ended up wearing a cricket style or cricket reeded leg guards. And he got a lot of harassment because of that as well. You actually will see him in pictures today. If you Google Brashnahan, they're big, huge leg guards. They're not very maneuverable. Leather kneecap parts, and then like I said, the bottoms are reeded. I actually own a set. They're hard to find, and with that didn't really catch on as quickly as like, for example, the chest protector did. The leg guards, were looked at as a sign of weakness, but Brashnahan stuck with it and continued to wear them.
Now, were there any pieces that you came across maybe that you've added to your collection? And we'll talk about your collection in a little bit here, but just in your research of pieces of equipment that just didn't catch on or maybe were just ineffective in their purpose?
Well, so aside from the mouth guard, you know, I had seen that there was a patent for the baseball chest protector, or I say chest protector, is cage, and you'll see pictures of this. And I haven't found any real pictures of this, so it may have just been the idea or the drawing of it. And it's a large cage that actually was worn on the front body portion of the catcher, and it had a kind of a fence that would shoot up in front of the catcher's face. And it's like a box. There's literally no way you would be able to move with this thing on. Like I said, I've never been able to see one of those in real life, or a real picture of one. There's also catcher's masks out there that you'll see that have large wings that come out the side, wire mesh that almost sticks out from the ear portion. And it's my understanding those were more and more by umpires. I have not seen very many pictures of the catchers wearing those, but obviously those didn't catch on. And then the wire mesh masks themselves, changed the visibility with the early goggle style Spider-Man masks that I was talking about earlier, between the late 1800s through the early 1900s, had limited visibility. Like I said, you had a lot of bars that were running vertically. Those were later removed in order to have a wider range of visibility and to what you see today. And then as you move up a little bit further, you'll see umpires were actually wearing the large black beam masks that had either one or two black, I say beams, but it's not wire. It's almost like a carbon type material. Some of those catchers actually wore, I think Yogi Berra wore it as well. You'll see some pictures of him. Those actually phased out as well. But again, visibility. You had this large black beam in your way instead of having smaller wire frame.
Now, overall, we're talking about, I guess, the progression of catcher's equipment. And you said you go up until 1940. We see today that, catcher's equipment is still going through some minor changes in terms of trying to find what works best for visibility, for mobility, for, just overall comfort. I think one of the examples that I can think of is we've seen catchers, I think over the past decade, start to adopt the hockey style catcher's mask instead of the turned around hard cap, with the mask sliding over it. Seems to be easier to put on and take off. That might be one example that I can think of, but do you see any gear changes that you've come across, or even things in your own playing time that you feel may catch on in the future to help further protect the catcher and make them more effective at their position?
Well, I think that some of the changes have already come into effect that I never even dreamed of when I was playing. For example, your regular masks, not the hockey style masks, they're actually putting springs, shock absorption type mechanisms on them. So when a ball comes off the mask, it actually is absorbed by these little shocks or springs on the side of the mask. Obviously, masks are lighter now, whether it be aluminum or any type of other material. You want them to be light, and that includes the foam padding. The foam padding can add weight. Again, I'm not as versed on what is new and current. I am familiar with the hockey style mask that came around. Charlie O'Brien was one of the first to wear it. I think it was in 1991. I'm not a fan of that mask. I'm a traditionalist. Mm-hmm. And the times that I wore it, it was cumbersome to me, especially if you were going to take it off and on. But I can see its use and its benefit. It is a whole lot safer. But, they've done several studies. There's a lot of catchers who are suffering from concussions, from repeated, foul tips. Matter of fact, I was just reading an article the other day about Tim McCarver. He says he has nerve damage in his neck from plate collisions. Now, that really doesn't have anything to do with the mask necessarily, but it just shows to the kind of grit of the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing we always hear about, and I've seen some evolutions in the technology, is catcher's knees, where you're constantly in a squatting position and the damage that can do long-term just to your kneecaps and your overall leg health. I can think of the padding that's usually worn behind the knees sometimes by catchers in the modern era. Historically, again, going back to your research, even going back to the dead ball era, was it common for pitchers to just take that same crouching position? Did they go on one knee? Was there any sort of way to help them in terms of keeping that position through an entire game?
So, I mean, obviously they were standing more upright the further back you go, because they were further back from the plate, and the closer they got, the lower of the crouch they got.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I think it was Connie Mack, actually. I can't remember where, but he made a statement as far as how catchers should maintain the upright position. And this is almost as a training manual that he was putting out, that catchers shouldn't be in that crouching style, because there was no maneuverability behind it. And you needed to be able to move, and you couldn't do it if you were crouched. But again, I think that in order to get to that tighter strike zone, as pitchers became more accurate with their pitches and the balls became better, you wanted to get a smaller target, and that target required catchers to get lower and lower to the ground. And again, like you said, that had its negative to it, because people had knee conditions, with it. Some of my favorite, Benito Santiago, used to catch with the one leg out and one knee down, and be able to throw the ball from that position. You don't see a lot of that anymore. And I think that's because the velocity of these pitchers is getting higher and higher, and it's harder and harder for these catchers to move. You got to be on point for it. So I couldn't imagine them staying in that standing position any longer than they did, especially with the changes that were happening. Catchers were one of the first to get gloves on the field, period. And advertisements for these, the gloves, the fingerless gloves, were geared towards catchers before any type of baseman or fielder gloves, because the need for the glove was needed, So just goes to show that catchers have always kind of been at the forefront, I'd like to believe anyway, of the technology in baseball. And that's just my own biased opinion, but.
Oh, I would agree with that. Absolutely. Any type of equipment, evolution that we see usually starts behind the plate. And, we're seeing, like you said, there's some really neat technology things that are happening right now in terms of baseball equipment, lighter equipment, being able to protect different parts of the body. It's exciting. It really is, to see where the sport is going. Now, I wanted to just backtrack a little bit here based on what you had stated, Jeff. You mentioned some catchers that you grew up admiring, names that really help push the position forward, help push catchers' equipment into the mainstream being used. You mentioned Bresnahan, you mentioned Benito Santiago, you mentioned Connie Mack, you mentioned Pudge Rodriguez. Is there a favorite catcher that you have, just your number one catcher in baseball history, one that you admire the most?
Oh man, it'd be tough to pin it down to one. I mean, I think Pudge Rodriguez, like I said before, is more of the, all the tools right there. Mickey Cochran is a close second, hard as nails. But then Bresnahan too. I think just being, kind of at the forefront of and not caring and just going out there, and, he was a great hitter. Again, I have a hard time comparing players to then to now, simply because of the changes in the game. So I would, if I had to pick a number one, it'd probably be Pudge Rodriguez. I grew up watching him. Everything he's done has amazed me, in his career. I actually got to meet him 2 or 3 years ago. The year that he got inducted, I actually got to meet him. I'm a big Washington Nationals fan, and so he was up there signing autographs because, he ended his career with the Nats.
That's right.
Yeah. So he's a whole lot shorter than I thought he'd be. And that's funny, because growing up, I'm 6'1", and everybody said, hey, catchers got to be small. They got to be small. And it's funny, the more research I've done, catchers weren't always small. Gosh, I can remember his name. I don't know if it might have been James White. He's the one that was credited with the apron style mitt. I said Doolin earlier, but so James White in 1882, I think he was actually about 5'11", 5'10", and that's pretty tall for the time period.
Absolutely, yeah.
Whereas Pudge is 5'7", 5'8",
That's true. That's a good point. I'm looking here. Yeah, I think I'm trying to scan through to James Deacon White, who you're mentioning, catcher in the 1870s. Yep, you're 100% right. He was tall for his era. Now, yeah. Now, overall, okay, so we talked about your favorite catchers. We talked about the evolution of the history of catcher's equipment going through. I'm really excited to get to this next topic, which is about talking about your personal collection, what you've been able to acquire over the years since you started, collecting catcher's equipment, vintage catcher's equipment. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorite pieces, or maybe some pieces that are just stand out as, odd or interesting, I guess you could say?
So like I mentioned before, so I have the reeded shin guards. The Wright Ditson is the maker of them. Probably late 1900 reeded shin guards. I love them. They're in great condition. And it's so funny. I started with my collection with masks. Primarily, I started with 4 masks. Told my wife, "Oh, this is going to be it." Well, that's famous last words. I think my collection's up to 20-something masks now. But the ones that I really want are hard to find because my favorite masks I have 4 of the Spider-Man or goggle style masks that I talked about earlier, where they're the wire mesh and they actually have the vertical bar coming up the front. And some of them actually have the padding is coming out of some of them and it's horsehair. You can see it coming out. It's amazing to me. Those are probably some of my favorites. One of them actually has a throat protector on there, early throat protector that they were trying to push for a while there. As far as mitts, like I said, I have a pillow mitt. It's about a 38-inch pillow type mitt with not very much of a pocket. And then I could tell you what my wish list is outside of these, because the Airfield apron chest protectors are so hard to find. That's something I'm always looking for, and they're extremely expensive. And a funny story is, I found one on eBay, and I was so excited about it, and ordered it, in a rush, got it, and it's a child size. So I have a child size apron mitt now, or chest protector, which actually is pretty cool in itself, because I do have a couple child size catcher's masks, and they're actually legitimate wire. I mean, they're thin wire. If a ball hit them at high velocity, it'd probably bend them. But it's pretty cool to know that they were actually making the same styles for the youth. As far as any other pieces, I mean, I'm always on the lookout for anything that's unique or hadn't been seen, very often. And I have one of my catcher's masks is that famous spitter mask that Yogi Berra wore, Al Lopez wore, and it has the actual circle in front of your mouth.
Yep.
I have a couple of these in it. So we have the circle, and then I have one that has the diamond frame. And I actually posted one on Instagram the other day. And why they made those was legitimately for them to spit. Because why else? You can talk just fine. It's to get something out of your mouth if you need to get it out of your mouth, and I think that's pretty cool. So.
Now, we must have some listeners with some memorabilia of their own, or maybe some pictures of items that they've come across. And, I'm sure they'd love to share some of this with you, as a fellow aficionado for collecting vintage equipment. So just for the people that are listening, Jeff, can you tell them how can they connect with you to be able to see what you post about your own collection and just catcher's history in general? How can they follow you? How can they connect with you?
So again, I have an Instagram account. It's at Mask and Mitten, MaskandMitten, so Mask and Mitten. And then I have an email address also. It's maskandmitten@icloud.com. It's the best way to get a hold of me.
All right. So for our listeners, if you have some equipment of your own in your collection, catcher's equipment that you'd like to share with Jeff, I'm sure he'd appreciate the pictures and some of the words. And certainly he's a great person to follow. I love all of your posts, Jeff. You're somebody, that's how I originally came across and asked you to come on the interview, just following you on social media. And I'm just very appreciative that you could take some time out of your schedule to come on the show and discuss your collection and the history of the catcher in general.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Jeff Fields, everybody, Mask and Mitten. Follow him and really enjoy what he's putting on. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. And remember, there are only 2 seasons, winter and baseball.